Good evening, all. Okay, so next week, in fact, this is shipping news number 60, and you might even actually see it at the screen if you're looking at my website, The Dyslexic Detective. Again, feel free to, I always try to, I probably don't say this enough, which I say to people like and subscribe and follow my page, blah, 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 because if it doesn't happen, then I don't get the message actually out. Although, to be honest, I use a lot of my online content as a work page. Anyway, but today I want to go into a kind of an issue here about what's happening with Anthony Fauci and the whole issue about dual use and the gain of function warfare. And this particular thing started off by, obviously, during the current congressional report. I think at the time when I'm speaking, it's like Anthony Fauci has turned around and said, I claim the fifth. I refuse to answer on the grounds I may criminate myself 111 times. And of course, in the United States, the Republicans and the Democrats have all used this as a football, as has been the case here in all the Five Eyes nations, where nobody actually wants to get into the deeper meaningfuls about what we actually have learnt about Wuhan. And this is again, I'm going to try and make this an issue, today's issue. It's not about whether you're pro-vaccines or anti-vaccines. I'm talking about the origins of the disease and what we learnt from science as a response afterwards. And it's one of these things that really frustrates me because, I report on these issues and this is what we'll begin into. I report on these issues quite some time before they come about. And then they come about, and then all the people pop up who've been there 5 seconds, and they've all got bigger platforms and bigger money, and people listen to that stuff, and they actually miss out on some really important backdrop stories. So, on this situation was when we get into the issue of dual and gain of function. I thought about this interview that I did with Francis Boyle, who was a Harvard University lecturer who just taught law. It basically helped write a lot of the biowar legislation for the United States during I think it was the Bush-Reagan administration era. Francis, my encounters, was a very, very lovely, intelligent guy, a little bit on pompous side, and he knew what he knew, and if you didn't agree with him, but that was said. I brought him on to my show in about 2015, and we were talking about events that were taking place in Africa in terms of with Ebola virus. Now, I've just told you his background. My background is I have served in the New Zealand Armed Forces for 6 years, and I did a degree in political science with state terrorism. So I knew quite a bit about biological stuff from my training before these events took place. And obviously, I covered the H1N and swine flu and the bird flu. And again, these are issues that were very important because what I was learning about some of the funding and some of the research being carried out in this field, which I've reported about and talked about, and Dunedin's implications for it, or New Zealand's implications from about 2003 when I started to see some very shady, sketchy people getting involved in the whole vaccine. It's not about being for or against vaccines, but these are vaccines which we were told for is about biosecurity, when we're going, well, actually, the people that you're talking about are more just about bioweapons. So I got into this interview and we talked about these things, and we talked about how some of the explanations that were being given by these individuals were just not adding up. And one of the key things is we talk a lot about the bat theory, and it's actually, I think it's Stephen Holmes actually points this out, this critique, and he says, oh, yes, I've had this critique, but he doesn't actually respond to the critique, which is, bats are territorial creatures, they only fly X amount of far, and so when you've got 3 outbreaks occurring at the same time in Africa, you would expect that the bat range is only 80 k's, and the different sites, the 3 different sites, are thousands of kilometres away from any of these particular creatures that could actually carry the question being found with that particular pathogen on them. You expect to find in between vectors or substance cases of where that virus has turned up beforehand. What you don't expect to see is that's over there, that's 3,000 miles in, and there's nothing in between. And we say, well, this is a bit odd. And we didn't know a lot of the organisations and people that would become very important later on in 2020. We didn't know who they were. We were saying, well, this doesn't seem right. And I was quite concerned because there was a lot of claims being made at the time that Tulane University in the United States of America wasn't carrying out any biodefence weaponry in Africa. I knew, and again, this is I don't really care if you believe me or not, but I knew from articles I'd read and stuff that was not true. But again, after this became an issue, social media stepped in, controlled by tech companies, and it became very, very hard to get a lot of that information. Again, we managed to extract and pull bit by bit, kind of rebuild a piece of picture of stuff that had actually been wiped out. And again, from what we've now learnt from the hearings and subsequent in 2020, it sort of goes a long way to actually, again, vindicating what we've been claiming back in 2015. Now, all of this went on, and what I did was I started to kind of Google to find. I wanted to track down the interview and I wanted the transcript, and AI, to reinforce my point about this, wonderful world of digital platform where actually you can't rely on the information because they can control it if they want, and it was trying to tell me that Francis Boyle basically believed that Ebola and COVID were offensive biological weapons, and that this is what had been discussed on the Deadline report. Was it Deadline report? I think it might have been called the Postman Show. Actually, it was the Postman Show, and we're doing on OAR FM. In fact, no, we weren't. We were doing that one on the Vinnie Eastwood Show. And I sort of came back and I sort of interrogated the AI on Google for a bit, and eventually it conceded. So, well, yes, no, you're right. He didn't say that COVID was a bioweapon because, of course, my interview was 2015 and COVID actually hadn't occurred. So, basically AI had just lied about Francis Boyle and what he represented. And eventually it conceded that, yes, actually, maybe Francis Boyle was probably a little bit, as a Harvard lecturer in law, probably a little bit more qualified to talk about what constituted a biowarfare than Anthony Fauci. But I'm going to see if I can along the way make, I might find an empirical example. But again, it's interesting, that whole gain of function terminology. Now, being me, tend to go, well, God, but tomato, we all knew that you're trying to make the disease more stronger, so you can quibble about what is gain or gain function. But the point is, from if you went up to 2015 press releases, you'd find the same people that were denying that they were doing gain of function after 2020 were using that term right up until 2015, right up until the Ebola outbreak, which turned out that a lot of the tracking was